Good day. Now that this most bizarre impeachment is once and for all and finally out of the way, I think it is a good moment to recapitulate in order to try to understand what exactly went on and why this strange, unconstitutional impeachment took place. I accept, first of all, and I should make it clear in this at the outset of this programme, that what I'm going to say now is based on a certain amount of speculation. However, when one reviews the facts, I think the facts show that this speculation is warranted and well-grounded. Briefly, in my opinion, this was not an impeachment brought by the Democrats against Donald Trump. This was an impeachment which is really an event in an ongoing civil war between two factions of the Republican Party for control of that party. One faction is the established Republican Party leadership in the Congress, led by people like Mitch McConnell and including others like Senators Mercouris, Collins, and the rest. And on the other side is Donald Trump and the large number of people who support him, who represent the Republican Party's electoral base. Why did this impeachment happen, and how does this conflict in the Republican Party explain it? Briefly, there were never any grounds, in my opinion, for impeachment at all, at least not on the basis of what the Democrats alleged in the article of impeachment they drew up. I'm not going to recapitulate old arguments, but the whole point about incitement of insurrection is that the Democrats needed to prove, first, that there had been incitement on the part of Donald Trump, and secondly, that there had been an insurrection, both within the meaning of the law. I understand these arguments that the Democrats are now making, that in an impeachment one does not need to rise to the level of the legal definition of incitement and insurrection, because impeachment is not a criminal process. However, it was the Democrats, when they drew up their article of impeachment, who decided to pick these terms, and it is completely unsurprising if the Republicans, or at least the Republican senators who voted against impeachment, insisted on holding them to their legal definition. That was completely predictable and ought to have been predicted. So why did the Democrats do it? Why did they base an impeachment article on these loaded terms? And why did they, having decided to impeach Donald Trump on that basis, do it without calling any witnesses, examining the evidence, holding House committees, or doing any of the things that might have been expected in order to make an impeachment stick? Why also did they persist with the impeachment after Donald Trump left office, when it was, or should have been, blindingly obvious that Republican senators would say that impeachment of a president who had left office was unconstitutional, since it is not supported by the wording of the Constitution? Well, I think the Democrats did that because they expected and were led to believe that a large number of Republicans would join them. In fact, I'm going to go further, and I'm going to say that I suspect that the Democratic leadership, Pelosi, Schumer, and the rest, were actually given private assurances by senior Republicans at the start of this process, in the days immediately after the events of 6th January, which led them to think that that would happen. I say that, I accept, I have no corroboration for that comment, but it is impossible for me to explain why things happened as they happened without that being so. So, in fact, we do have some evidence from that time which suggests it. We know, of course, that Liz Cheney came out to say that she supported the impeachment, and we had all those interesting stories in the New York Times and elsewhere that Mitch McConnell actually welcomed the impeachment. It seems to me that when you put together the very strange behavior of the Democrats with those hints coming from McConnell and with those statements by Liz Cheney and by others, it becomes fairly clear that the Democrats pressed ahead with the impeachment because they expected that Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership would back them and had received some assurances that Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership would back them because Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership were looking to use the impeachment to purge Donald Trump and his supporters from the Republican Party. Well, if that was the plot, and I'm sure it was, then it all fell apart almost immediately when it became clear that the Republicans who were minded to use the impeachment in that way were only a tiny minority of the Republican Party. In effect, it all failed on the first day when only 10 Republicans out of the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives were prepared to follow Liz Cheney's leadership and support the impeachment article. From that moment, it became clear to Mitch McConnell and to other Republican leaders that there was no or very little support within the Republican Party for any impeachment of Donald Trump. At that point, it also, I think, started to become clear that the Republican base up and down the country remained solid behind Donald Trump. So, as we saw, Mitch McConnell refused to call the Senate into session whilst Donald Trump was still president, thereby rendering the entire impeachment unconstitutional and, in effect, an exercise that was bound to fail. I say unconstitutional because, of course, that is my opinion, but as we now know, it is Mitch McConnell's opinion also. Mitch McConnell has made this bizarre speech in which he says that Donald Trump is guilty and ought to have been impeached, but that he cannot be impeached because he is no longer in office. Of course, it is Mitch McConnell himself who delayed bringing the Senate trial forward until after Donald Trump had left office. So Mitch McConnell, in his usual way, has given himself a way out, created for himself a way out to justify this completely contradictory position which he is taking. Anyway, the result was that we had a case, an impeachment trial that was always, from that moment, from that very first moment, from that very first day, predestined to fail. And it needs to be said, it failed completely, because the Democrats, presumably expecting that there would be a support for them from some Republicans or sufficient Republicans to impeach Donald Trump, took no step to get their case together, and in the absence of any such steps, when it came to trial, it completely unraveled and fell apart. There was no witness evidence, no proper investigation, no clear idea of exactly what happened, no agreement even on basic facts like the timeline of the events on the 6th of January. Instead, when we had these bizarre events like this strange Perry Mason moment, when the House impeachment managers, realizing that the entire impeachment was falling apart, suddenly stood up after Trump's lawyers had made his case and said that they just heard from this witness who was prepared to come forward and would prove their case. Of course, that wasn't true, and they had to immediately backtrack when it turned out that Donald Trump's lawyers had all sorts of other witnesses that they wanted to call, which would have undermined the Democrats' case even further. So the result was that the impeachment limped on to its inevitable acquittal when it turned out that the bulk of the Republican Party in the Senate, like the overwhelming majority of Republicans in the House, were not prepared to support it and intended to vote against it. This whole affair demonstrates the extraordinarily poor judgment and lack of political skill of Mitch McConnell and of the Republican leaders as they find themselves confronted by this enormous tidal wave of support for Donald Trump within the Republican Party across the country. Since Mitch McConnell thought that the impeachment was unconstitutional, he should have come out from an early point and said so. He should have made completely clear that he thought the impeachment could not succeed, and he should have told the Democrats this, not let them carry on for weeks with an impeachment that was bound to fail. By doing that, Mitch McConnell has placed the American people in a situation where they've had to watch their Congress wasting its time on something that was of no importance and was bound to fail. Mitch McConnell has also, of course, incensed the Democrats, who must be angry that whatever assurances he gave them that he would back the impeachment, he was not able to fulfill. And he has incensed the other members of the anti-Trump leadership in the Senate, who must feel that he has left them to hang out to dry. And of course, he has incensed Republicans up and down the country who see him as the intriguer that he actually is, and as someone who doesn't back their own president. It's been a shabby and sordid affair, and it shows how plots and intrigues carried out behind the scenes can go catastrophically wrong for those who engage in them in a democratic political system such as that which still exists in the United States. And that is the last point I wish to make. Ultimately, this impeachment has been, in that respect, a useful exercise. It has cleared the air. It has demonstrated that the democratic checks and balances which still exist in the United States are still working despite the repeated assaults which have been made upon them. An impeachment brought unconstitutionally out of time and in disregard of due process has failed. An attempt by a faction within the Republican Party to remove from that party someone who is massively popular and supported by Republicans up and down the country has failed because that faction was not able in the end to prevail against that weight of opinion. It shows The democracy is still just about alive in America and is still working. However, it also shows how that democracy needs to be defended and protected at all times because of the assault it is coming under. This impeachment should never have happened. There was never a case, certainly not the case that the Democrats were trying to bring, and the very fact that it was launched at all is a warning signal of how bad and dangerous things are. It is some reassurance that things are not so bad, that it's not so bad that it succeeded, but instead failed. But that is an assurance, not a promise, that things will remain good for much longer. Democrats, and I'm not talking now about people, not members of the Democratic Party, but people who believe in democracy in America, need to understand that and need to remember those famous words that the price of democracy is perpetual vigilance to defend democracy and protect the people's rights. Thank you very much for joining me for this program. Please look us up on our other channels, the Duran, where I join with my friend Alex Christoforou, and Alex's channel. You'll find links under this video. Please check us out on our other platforms, BitChute, Library, Odyssey, Rumble, and the rest. Please support us via PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar, and via Bitcoin. And please check out our shop, where you'll find our awesome Duran Magic mugs, our amazing t-shirts, long-sleeved and short-sleeved, our sweatshirts, our hats, and our hoodies. And thank you for joining me for this program, and I look forward to you joining me for further ones.